The day my daughter got married, I paid for everything. The venue, the flowers, the photographer who charged more per hour than I made in a day back when I was still working. I didn't mind. I told myself that's what fathers do. I believed that for a long time. I'm 63 years old. I retired 2 years ago after 31 years as a civil engineer for the county. My wife passed when my daughter was 19. Breast cancer, quick and merciless, and after that it was just the two of us. We were close. I thought we were close. I held on to that thought, the way you hold onto a railing in the dark, certain it's bolted to the wall, not knowing it was already pulling loose from the plaster. My daughter's name is Serena. She's 34 now. Her husband, I'll call him my son-in-law. His name is Brant. He came into her life about 5 years ago. He seemed fine at first. Quiet. Ambitious in that vague way where someone always talks about their next move, but you're never quite sure what the current move is. He had an idea for a landscaping business, then a real estate venture, then he was going to flip houses. None of it ever quite happened, but he talked about all of it with such confidence that it took me longer than I'd like to admit to realize that confidence was the only thing he actually had. They got married 3 years ago, outside of Asheville. My daughter looked beautiful. My son-in-law looked comfortable. I shook his hand at the reception and he told me I'd done a great job with everything, the way you might compliment a caterer. They moved into a place in Charlotte. Rent was steep, $2,400 a month for a 2-bedroom they didn't really need. My son-in-law said the neighborhood was up and coming. My daughter said they were still getting settled. Could I help out just for a few months, just while Brant got the business off the ground? I said yes. The few months became 6 months. The 6 months became a year. I told myself this was normal. I'd read articles about how hard it was for young people now, the housing costs, the student loans. My daughter had student loan payments on top of the rent. I covered those some months too. I thought of it as an investment in her, in their future. What I didn't let myself think about was how my son-in-law had never once said thank you. Not in a way that meant anything. He'd say it the way you say have a good one to a cashier. Automatic, meaningless, already looking at his phone. The house I live in is the one my wife and I bought in 1998. It's a 3-bedroom on a quiet street outside of Raleigh. Good neighborhood. Paid off. After she passed, I stayed because I didn't know where else to go, and then I stayed because I didn't want to leave her garden. She planted hostas along the back fence that still come up every spring, and every spring I stand at the kitchen window and look at them and feel something I don't have a name for. About 18 months ago, my son-in-law started coming by more. Not with Serena, alone, or sometimes with her trailing behind him looking at her phone. He'd walk through my house the way men walk through houses they're thinking of buying, looking at the ceiling, running his hand along the doorframe. Once I saw him measuring the hallway with his phone. I asked him what he was doing. He said he was just curious. I let it go. Last Thanksgiving, the 3 of us sat at my dining room table. The same table where my daughter had done her homework for 12 years, where we'd eaten every Christmas morning, where I'd told her about her mother's diagnosis, and my son-in-law brought up the house. He said it made more sense for them to move in, financially. He said I was rattling around in 3 bedrooms by myself, that it was a waste of space, that it would save everyone money if we combined households. He made it sound like a spreadsheet decision, logical, obvious. He said I could take the smaller bedroom in the back, the smaller bedroom, in my own house. I looked at my daughter. She was looking at her plate. I said I'd think about it. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in the dark in the bedroom where I'd slept next to my wife for 22 years and I thought about the word rattling. That's what he'd said, rattling around. Like I was a marble in a box. Like I was the inconvenience in my own home. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no either. I said I needed time, and somehow that became permission for things to start shifting without my agreement. By February, my son-in-law was having mail delivered to my address. A few packages at first, then a piece of mail addressed to both of them with my house number on it. I brought it in without saying anything. I told myself I was being generous. I told myself family was complicated and I didn't want to be difficult. My daughter was happy, or she seemed happy, and I had learned after my wife died that you don't interfere with the happiness of someone you love, even when something about it sits wrong with you at 4 in the morning. They started coming over on weekends, not to visit, to be there. My son-in-law would sit in my recliner and watch television, while my daughter organized my kitchen cupboards in a way I didn't ask for and couldn't find things afterward. He ordered a pizza once and didn't offer me any. I want to be clear that this is a small thing. I know it's a small thing. But small things have a way of showing you the shape of something larger. In March, Brant suggested I refinance the house. He said values in my neighborhood had gone up significantly. He was right about that, and I could pull out equity, maybe $80,000 or $90,000, and invest it. He had a contact, a guy he'd done a deal with before. He said the returns were solid. He said my money was just sitting there. I said I'd look into it. I didn't look into it, but I started paying closer attention. I noticed that whenever my daughter and I were alone, she was warm, like her mother, funny and easy to talk to. She'd ask about my neighbor's dog, who she'd known since it was a puppy, or she'd bring me something from the bakery she knew I liked, or she'd sit with me at the kitchen table after dinner, and we'd just talk the way we used to. Those were the moments I held on to. But when Brant was there, something changed in her. She got smaller. She'd defer to him on things that had nothing to do with him. Which restaurant, what time, whether I wanted the TV louder. He'd answer for her sometimes. She'd let him. I didn't say anything about that either. I'm not proud of that. In April, Brant came by on a Tuesday afternoon while I was in the yard. I hadn't known he was coming. He let himself in with the key Serena had given him. I didn't know she'd given him a key. He came out through the back door with a tape measure and a legal pad, and he started measuring the back bedroom, the one where my daughter used to sleep. He had dimensions written down already. He said he was just planning ahead. I asked him what he was planning. He said they were serious about making the transition happen by summer, that it was the smart move. He said it while writing something on his legal pad without looking up at me. I went inside and made coffee and sat at my kitchen table. I'm 63 years old. I retired. I have my pension and my Social Security in the house. I'm not a wealthy man, but I'm not a struggling one. I have enough, and I have this house, and I have my wife's hostas in the back, and the table where my daughter did her homework. And I sat there that Tuesday afternoon, and something I'd been ignoring for a long time started to become impossible to ignore. I called my neighbor. He's been next door for 20 years, a retired judge, and he's the kind of man who listens before he speaks. I asked him if he knew a good estate attorney. He said he knew a good one and a great one, and he'd give me the great one's number. That evening I called. I want to be clear about what happened after that and what didn't happen. I didn't do anything rash. I didn't cut anyone off or make any dramatic gestures. I just got informed. I spent about 2 months meeting with the attorney, getting my paperwork in order, understanding what I had and what my options were. I updated my will. I established a trust for the house that made very specific provisions about what would happen to it and who could make decisions about it. I moved most of my liquid assets into accounts that were solely in my name with updated beneficiaries. And then I waited. Serena called me on a Friday in June, the week after school let out. She teaches second grade, which is the one part of her life I've never had a single worry about. She's wonderful with children, and she asked if we could all have dinner on Sunday. I said, of course. They came over and I made pot roast, which had been my wife's recipe and which my daughter had asked me to make since she was small. We ate at the table. It was a decent evening, mostly. Brant was on his phone less than usual. Serena told me about the end of the school year, a boy in her class who had finally learned to read in May and had run to her with a library book to show her. I thought about how good she was at that. How patient. After dinner, while I was washing up, Brant came into the kitchen. He leaned against the counter. He said they needed to talk about the timeline. He said summer was moving fast, and they wanted to start bringing boxes over the following weekend. He used the word transition again. He made it sound gentle, inevitable. He said he'd already looked at storage units for some of my furniture. My furniture, in storage. I dried my hands on a dish towel. I turned to look at him. I said as quietly as I could that there was no transition, that this was my house, that I had never agreed to any arrangement, and I would not be agreeing to one. I said it was time for both of them to stop treating my home as a thing they were waiting to inherit. I said I had spoken with an attorney and that my affairs were in good order and that no one would be moving into this house while I was living in it. He stared at me. I'd never spoken to him that way. I'd never spoken to almost anyone that way. He started to say something about the money I'd been helping with, about how that had to count for something, about how I was being unreasonable. I said the financial help had been a gift, freely given, and it was not a deposit on my home. Serena appeared in the kitchen doorway. She'd heard enough to understand what was happening. Her face went through several things in a few seconds. He said, and I want to remember this exactly because it matters. He said, "You're not going to live here forever." I looked at him. I said, "No, but I'm going to live here now." Then I asked both of them to go home. Serena called me the next morning. Brant did not. She was crying, not the angry kind, but the complicated kind, the kind that's also partly shame, and I let her cry without interrupting. When she finished, I told her that I loved her, and that I had always loved her, and that none of what I'd said the night before had anything to do with her. I told her she was her mother's daughter in the best possible way, and I believed she knew what was right. There was a long silence. She said she was sorry. She said she didn't know how things had gotten to where they were. She said she'd been telling herself it was all practical, that it made sense, that I had more space than I needed. And I heard in her voice that she'd been working to convince herself of something that had never quite convinced her. I told her I'd be glad to have lunch with her whenever she wanted. Just her. She came on a Wednesday, 3 weeks later. She brought flowers, not from a grocery store, the real kind, from the shop downtown. She put them on the table and hugged me for a long time. We sat and we ate sandwiches, and we talked about her students, and my neighbor's dog and the hostas. We talked around Brant mostly. That was all right. Some things get said in their own time. I don't know what happens next between them. That's not mine to know. What I know is that I live in my house, in the room where I choose to sleep, with my wife's garden out back and her recipe box on the counter. I turned 63 in August, and my neighbor came over and brought a pie, and we sat on the porch and watched it get dark, and talked about nothing in particular, and it was one of the better evenings I can remember. I'm not rattling around in anything. I know exactly where I am. That's something I used to take for granted. I don't anymore.